Welcome to the Journey Podcast. Let's grow together and let's reshape the health and fitness industry for the better. Welcome back, episode 3 of the Journey Podcast. Grateful to have you here, and I'm just going to launch straight into it because I've just had a very strong coffee. So I'm kind of raring to go this morning, and I want to talk about a subject, two subjects today. That's how we have the format going so far. So the two subjects that I'll be discussing today. So I want to dedicate the first half of the podcast to discussing alcohol, actually, and that's been something that's been coming up a lot recently in my clinic. You know that sort of we work with people on a one-to-one basis, and it seems to be a very difficult subject and a very difficult challenge for a lot of folks at the moment. And I've noticed that a lot, especially since lockdown, and maybe more so in the older generation as opposed to my generation. But definitely want to cover alcohol today and share some really valuable resources around that. And the second half of the podcast, I want to dedicate to. I describe these as like light bulb moments. Do you know whenever you hear something or you read something or you see something, and all of a sudden it just kind of like it clicks and it just makes sense. And I heard this quote, and I want to share it with you. And essentially, it's all around the concept that the journey is the point. And that's what I want to dedicate the second half of the podcast to, because I was always someone who chased the destination, who chased the result, who chased the outcome. And when I pivoted to recognizing that the real value was in the actual journey, the process to that, I found it so much easier to be not just more grateful, but I think more present, more not necessarily content, because I'm someone who always likes to keep pushing the envelope and trying to see just how much I can squeeze out of the time that I'm on this planet, but allows me to maybe not be so caught up in the future all the time. Always waiting for time to pass so I can be this person who can do X or this person who has whatever. And I think that has really served me recently. And you hear it all the time from people who accidentally maybe wish time away. And like as a new parent, I think the old cliche is, gosh, they'll start sleeping eventually. They'll start eating eventually, and like our little one, she eats just fine. I mean more so, they pick up their own ability to use knives and forks and things and spoons. Um, or they're able to start going to the toilet themselves eventually, or walking eventually, and it's like it's always eventually. And so you're always looking forward, you're never actually in the moment, within that. And time goes by, I suppose it's all relative, but it seems to go by so quickly. So presence for me, being in the moment. Was it Master Oogway from Kung Fu Panda had a very good quote. What did he say? He said something like, "The future is a mystery." I can't remember. "The past is like lessons or behind us or something." And the reason why they call it the present is because it's a gift. Now, I've murdered that quote, butchered it completely because I've not watched Kung Fu Panda in a very long time. So, um, but it's something like that. And whenever you kind of even just understanding like the present is a gift, and you start to be more like intensely involved within it, and thinking like, well, how can I get the most out of this? How can I actually focus on today? Who's the best version of me today? Who's shown up today to lead to sort of like to leave the path, or to build the path forward for that future version of myself, because it's not like that future version of myself is going to lay the path behind them. It's the path I'm creating in front of me that's going to lead to that future version of myself, if that makes sense. So that means I have to be involved in the present to do that. I can't be waiting for the future for that to happen. I can't wait for the future to give myself permission to enjoy my life, to be content, to push, to push the boundaries and see who I could be. So anyway, as you can see, the coffee is kicking in, and it's kicking in royally, and I still have a bit of it left, so I might have to do a top up at some stage during the podcast. But want to get straight in to the first part, and that is alcohol, and the way that we I guess structure these podcasts is not to just, throw information at you, that we have those additional resources that you can utilize to sort of really flesh out your understanding of these things. But instead, I wanted to share with you my experiences and mostly my failures and my lessons, so that you'll maybe find some familiarity with those. You'll maybe find some solace within that, some sense of togetherness, that if it's something that you're struggling with or have struggled with, that you're not alone in that. And I think our brains do a wonderful job of creating these like bubbles around us that convince us so like, well, the only word I can think of is convincingly. They convince us so convincingly. But they do, and they create this very sort of strong wall around us, that we are the only ones who are enduring this suffering, and that's not the case at all. And depression does a wonderful job of that, talking to someone who has struggled with that for a long time in their life. But certainly with alcohol, I just want to dig in on that and share my experiences. So where does it all begin with alcohol for me? Well, just like any rambunctious, socially inept, awkward, overweight, spotty teenage boy. Um, Shout out to all those who've been in those shoes. Um, Alcohol to me was quite scary to begin with, scary in terms of losing that feeling of control, but something that, you begin to try it with your friends. I was part of the rugby team when I was younger. As socially awkward as I was, and I like to think I was maybe not so bad back then. I did have sort of a wide friend group and a lot of really great friends, and people that I'm not as close to nowadays, sadly. But I think that's just, that's the product of time. Is you grow apart from people, you don't see them as much. People start their own lives, and it's just a normal consequence of growing up, I suppose. But I had a wonderful friend group at that time. I think definitely folks that I would still sit down with today, and they could spend the whole day with. But at that time, we were young, we were dumb, and we drank a bit too much, and we drank a bit too often, just like um, every sort of group back then, because we didn't really have access to. I think the problem nowadays is that there's a lot more availability for these other drugs that people take. Certainly, I have seen a rise in the likes of even like cocaine, but definitely like weed, marijuana, that sort of thing. I'm not really too, like, we don't really drink anymore, so and we don't really socialize in those kind of settings, so never really see it. But certainly even just passively through family members and sort of challenging situations from the last few years to a decade, you kind of see it through other people. So that's where it all started for me, and we would drink to excess, would think nothing of it. You would go out for like your pre-formals, your formals. You'd be going out during the week. So you would, and showing up to school the next day with a hangover. You'd be going out on a Saturday or a Friday. You'd have a rugby match in the morning. You'd have all your sort of your battle scars and things to wear with pride, and then you'd go out with your brown, we had described as shit kickers at the time, which is basically like these sort of like loafer style shoes with the jeans and some very choice options for clothing a lot of the time. Um, but I don't want to get into that. Let's just say you look back on it with a little bit of embarrassment. So you do. If you were to work backwards, you were to see yourself as you are today, you probably look back on it with a little bit of embarrassment. But that's kind of where it all started. And innocent, it was fun. There was nothing in the way of being sort of untoward or self-destructive about it. It certainly wasn't the best for us in terms of our physical health, but when you're that age, you can recover quick and you just keep motoring on. And that was fine. So that was sort of my initial experience with alcohol. So I had no real issues with it. No, there was nothing in my family where people would drink to excess or anything like that. So there was nothing that had really shaped, I guess, my relationship with alcohol in a negative sense. Although looking back on it now, I can see that the same behaviors I exhibited with food in terms of the binging would definitely cross over to the alcohol. Now, alcohol is slightly different in that you that out of body experience that we associate with binge eating almost comes from the the being inebriated, element of alcohol and the impact that it has on our brain and things like that. So I suppose I was exhibiting some behaviors like that at the time, but everyone was doing it. So it wasn't like I would stand out. It wasn't like I was the one who was consistently drinking to excess. Everyone was drinking to excess, and that was just how we maybe let off steam or what have you at that time. So fast forward a few years, and we're moving into university now. And I would actually say that the frequency of drinking reduced for me because I didn't feel maybe as comfortable doing that in Scotland, ironically. And that sort of continued for a while over the first few years of university, and it probably helped that I also had at one point, multiple jobs, but certainly I had the job at the weekend, so I couldn't really afford or felt good about being drunk, at the weekend or going into the weekend, and if we were ever going to be drinking, I mean, first year was an animal in of it, unto itself. Beyond that, things really slowed down for us. And I think that's because we'd sort of developed our social groups at that time, and so you didn't really need to use alcohol as a means of, I suppose, breaking down those comfort barriers in a way, where you could speak to people you'd never met before, develop friendships, develop close personal ties, and talk all sorts of nonsense with people in bathrooms that you shouldn't be in and things like that. Not to say that I was in girls' bathrooms, and I mean in the boys' bathrooms speaking for far too long in nightclubs that I shouldn't have been in because it was far too late. But that kind of continued, and then I think where the lessons really started to, when I talk about times where things maybe went wrong for me when it came to alcohol, was just after my dad had passed away. This was just before my 21st birthday. It's a very sort of like formative stage in my life. I was still a boy, you know. Um, I know we like to think people are adults by the time they hit 16, 18, depending on who you speak to, but like there's people my age who would still, if you were to ask them, would you consider yourself an adult? They'd be shaking their head at you. There's people older than me who would say the same thing. And certainly at that stage, I was definitely still very much a boy, a boy who was very focused on self, not really concerned with the future, not really concerned with responsibility, um, didn't really have any massive ambitions in life, was driven in certain areas, but not in maybe the most important ones. And that was like my dad passing was like a lightning rod in my life, where it's kind of like you have this fork in the road. You can go down the path of self-destruction, give it all up, and you'd have this wonderful excuse you can always use. Well, not a wonderful excuse, but a valid excuse you could always use. Or not take that easy path and live the hard life. You take the hard path and hope that eventually you'll lead an easy life. And for me, that was kind of choosing that I can no longer be the boy anymore. And I made that choice, but at the same time, I did things that I know we use the term maybe like toxic masculinity or whatever. To me, it's like maybe some harmful elements of masculinity. And that for me was feeling that expressing emotion or talking through about how I was feeling and things like that after he had passed and all the things that I was sort of contending with after that time, which I'd never really want to go into in a lot of depth because it wouldn't be fair on other people. But needs to say, it wasn't the pleasant of times. It wasn't the most pleasant of times, and but it was a pivotal moment in my life. And whilst, like I said, I'd sort of made that decision that now was putting the boy, what is the Jon Snow? Kill the boy, let the man be born, whatever. For me, I guess I sort of contended with that and started to make decisions that were more aligned with, well, if I'm sort of like the male head of the family, how am I going to start shaping my future to be able to care for the family and to lead a life of not just dignity, but also one that could be um, not admired, but set an example, right? I wanted to set an example. Um, and I hope that I'm doing a better job of that, certainly than what I had been doing in the immediate aftermath of dad passing. But what happened when he passed was I had sort of moved past food as my coping mechanism. And I could never really see myself going back to it because it hurt too bad to regress back to that. And certainly there was a lot of my self-identity now that had been attached to this physical change that I had gone through. So again, the food side of things could never fully, I could never, there was no part of my identity, there's still no part of my identity that could ever envision going back to that version of Jamie who had that larger body, who had those self-destructive tendencies around food. It just didn't compute at that time. And so the one element of my life that then became really problematic was the alcohol. And alcohol became a way for me to not just decompress, but also to escape from those circumstances because I found it really, really difficult. I had a lot of questions. There was a lot of sadness. There was a lot of anger. There was a lot of frustration. There was a lot of guilt. And alcohol became my way of dealing with that. And so I actually started to drink during the day. And I would be drunk in university lectures. I would be drunk going to um, the sort of the more technical classes where you'd be sort of hands-on in the labs and things. I would be drunk to the point of needing to be put to bed. If we were going out, sometimes I wouldn't even make it out, because I would drink so quickly and I would drink to excess and I was drinking much, much heavier, more um sort of not intense, but kind of like, you know, choosing options that were more sort of like alcoholic. So instead of maybe choosing like the old WKD blue and having blue lips for the rest of the night, it was, you're going for like the vodkas and the whiskeys and the Jägermeister and like you're hitting those hard and you're hitting them fast. And it was a really ugly time. And it definitely took me a while to come out of that. I think there was a period of between maybe 6 to 8 weeks whenever I came back to Edinburgh because I'd stayed home for about a month after he passed and really contended with that. It was, I mean, like it doesn't even seem real now whenever I look back, and at that period of time, it's almost like my brain's kind of half shut it out. But that was a really difficult time for me. And truth be told, I had to solve that issue on my own because I was too ashamed. And again, this maybe goes back to some of those negative elements of masculinity because I think we have a very, and I'm speaking maybe to men here and potentially to women as well. Men don't really deal all that well with talking about emotions, right? There's not a, there's, I like to think that I am maybe more emotionally intelligent than most men, but that's only because I'm challenged with that on a day-to-day basis. My whole job is to be able to read between the lines of what people are saying and to understand how they're feeling and what they're experiencing, because then I can help them. I couldn't do that to myself. And maybe that's because I hadn't moved into this role of coaching yet, so I wasn't really well versed in that. And when you're that age, no one really talks to you properly, and obviously I didn't have a significant male role model at that time. I wasn't that close with my granddad as I would have liked at that time. He was obviously processing an awful lot, and there was a bit of distance between that. And certainly if we were having conversations, it wasn't necessarily surface level, but a lot of it was me acting like I was okay to check in on him. And it wasn't a very healthy thing to do, I think, for either of us. But no one ever really spoke to me about the importance of being able to discuss these things, right? Or how to understand them, how to process these things. Because how the hell do you process your dad passing away out of the blue as a 20-year-old who then has all the responsibility on his shoulders because he's taken that on? It's just it's uh it's not an impossible task, but certainly it's a very complex one if you don't have the right support, and I didn't have the right support and I never sought it. So it was my problem. It was my fault. And so I nowadays I take extreme accountability for everything in my life. If something isn't working, that's up to me. Specifically if it's something that I have control of. And back then I think I would have very hastily maybe blamed external forces for that. And I don't see any value in that because I can't control those things. I can control myself. I can control my perception and I can control how I react, but I can't control the world. I can't control how other people act, and I can't control what happens in life a lot of the time. The world is chaotic, life is chaotic, nature is certainly chaotic, and so all we can do is control ourselves. And that was where that extreme accountability came in. But with the alcohol, I had to find a way out of that. And I knew that it wasn't the healthiest path to take. And so what I ended up doing was taking another unhealthy path. It started off as a better alternative at the time, bear in mind. But looking back on it now, it was still maybe an unhealthy path to take. And it actually led me back to alcohol. So this is when I started to bridge in to coaching. And the first iteration of coaching was Jamie Wright Nutrition, which failed miserably because I didn't understand how business models work. So we put that to one side. But then the second iteration of coaching became outwork. And outwork to me was a representation of who I was. And I was the guy who was always going to do more, who was always going to work harder, who was always going to stay up late at night, who was always going to go the extra mile. And I still do those things, but I do them from a different reason now. Before, I was basically using my work as a mask, to the outside world. It was an escape for me. So it replaced alcohol up until the mask shattered a couple of years down the line. And I don't want to get into it, but relationships collapsed. My all manner of relationships collapsed. I ended up going back to alcohol again because it was the only thing that I really had at that time. But I actually did the very hard thing that I should have done at the start, and that was to start working with a counselor, working with a therapist. And his name was Mark. He was an incredible. He was an ex sort of like Canadian like Marine or worked in the Canadian Navy. He was from Australia as well, which is just like, so I was trying to sort all this out in my head. I was like, okay, this fellow is about as eccentric as I am. And I remember it so vividly, and this is maybe where sobriety and at least the path to sobriety for me. And I would never say that I'm like one of these people who's like, I'm sober, but I just don't want alcohol really anymore in my life. and there's also been other people very close to me who have had challenges with alcohol too, which I also want to present an example for them that they can lead a life without it. And I think it also marries up well with, if I'm working with clients, I'm trying to show them they can lead a healthier, happier life without needing to do it in a way where they're vacant because of the influence of alcohol. But anyway, me and Mark, so me and Mark, and I know this is going on down all kind of different pathways, but I think, you guys really said that you love the story element side of things, and I think it's not going to come to, it's no shocker that alcohol is not necessarily good for you. There's no amount of alcohol that's good for you. I've looked at the clinical studies. There's none. The red wine thing, put that in the bin because the compound within that is supposedly supposed to have this like incredible antioxidant effect, resveratrol. That would be like I've got this, I've got this really fancy sort of paintbrush, and I'm putting like a little bit of paint on your house, whilst simultaneously I'm also taking a flamethrower to the rest of the house. It doesn't make sense. So it doesn't, and that's kind of like the influence of alcohol. There's no beneficial impact of alcohol. I've tried to wrestle with the idea of maybe there are elements beyond health. So, for example, alcohol might be a gateway for people being able to socialize, and being able to socialize and being social has a much more positive impact on your health than being isolated. But how would you kind of weigh that against drinking and potentially drinking to excess to make that happen? And I wrestle with that, as a potential concept or argument for the benefits of alcohol. But then you could look at the detriments towards the physical health, the mental health, because alcohol would still impact mental health in a way. How would it impact your sleep? How would it impact your finances? It could actually have a detrimental impact on relationships too, because whenever you're under the influence of alcohol, you're much more likely, obviously, to do something stupid. So yeah, I find it difficult to wrestle with that. But anyway, me and Mark. So and this isn't necessarily to do with alcohol, but I think this was the first step of me really putting alcohol behind me because it was how I finally dealt with the underlying reason for why I was drinking. And the reason why I was drinking was really because I had taken so much blame and guilt from my dad passing. I had this bizarre underlying thought that I could have done something to have changed that from happening. And the reason why it happened was more or less like a total freak, like incident that no one could have predicted. And so if the doctors who had worked intensely with him couldn't predict it, couldn't do anything about it, what would a 20 something, you know, who barely knows his left from his right, or as we like to say in Northern Ireland, his arse from his elbow, what would he be able to do to stop that? And I think I just felt so much guilt. And a lot of that is because I kind of spoke about it in a previous episode. I I believe that my life has value because I conduct it in a way where I do my best to be of service to other people. And so when I saw the pain that my family were experiencing, I thought my purpose was to remove their pain. But my brain had warped that in a way to say, well, you could have done that if you had have saved them. But I couldn't have saved them, obviously. So it was anyway, so Mark helped me to make sense of this. He helped me to sort of piece these pieces back together again. And I remember so vividly that first session where there must have just been so much pent up that the first thing he said to me, look dead across the room. We had like we were sitting maybe like less than 3 feet apart, 4 feet apart, and he's like armchairs. And we were sort of just having the crack, this, that, and the other. And he said, "Are you ready to get started?" And I said, "Oh yeah, yeah, let's go. Yeah, yeah. I'll probably say some silly things, this, that, and the other." And he's like, "Yeah, don't be worrying about it." And he looked me dead in the eye, like no break, and he just said, "I'm going to try to do this in his accent." Mate, are you all right? And I know that sounds like a bit like a parrot, okay? And he said that to me, and it was like the whole world froze for a wee second. And the next thing he said, "Would you like a tissue, mate?" He didn't keep saying mate, okay, but that's the only way I can sort of do an Australian accent. I need that to tie it together, or else my brain can't process how to do it. I was like, "Well, what do you mean?" And and I felt like this warm stream coming down my face, and I had started to like just uncontrollably cry, but not like gurning and but just like it was like my eyes were just like someone had turned on the tap, and they were just going. And he was like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm fine." And very quickly we sort of realized that I wasn't fine. And the GP who had said, you've got high functioning depression, he was like, this is kind of a sign of that. You've got so much repressed and sort of held back emotion around these things that have happened to you that it's just, has anyone ever asked you if you're okay? And it's like, well, apart from after it happened, not really, not ever, because I've never let someone see that in a way. And when you look back on it now, it's sort of it's kind of silly that you would have let yourself get to that state, but it does kind of make sense. And I suppose like the whole point of this story was alcohol for me and alcohol for a lot of people beyond maybe those teenage years where we're experimenting, we're rebelling, we're trying to find our way, we're trying to fit in, we're trying to do this, we're trying to do that. You might even be trying to build up the courage to go and speak to that attractive person across the room, maybe even sneak in a wee kiss at the end of the night. Beyond that, today, if you're a parent, if you're, like an older person, if you're just getting through the week, if you're by yourself, very rarely is alcohol used in a way that would be conducive to living a healthier, happier life. I see it so often where alcohol is used as a means of coping, as a means of getting through, or as a means of escaping. And I mean this with all the kindness in the world. You are not a teenager anymore. You don't need to drink that way. You can do it socially the odd time, no worries. But if you're drinking multiple times a week, there is no justification for that whatsoever. None. I know that there is like these kind of popular ideals of the folks who live out in Italy and France and the blue zones, and they drink every night, and they glug gallons of olive oil, and they live to their 1 million and this, that, and the other. It's all nonsense. Drinking every day is one of the worst things you can do for yourself, even if it's just one glass, because that one glass will have a negative impact on your health, in so many different ways. It will impact your sleep. It will impact how your body metabolizes nutrients. It will impact how your body stores nutrients. So it will. And I go in depth a lot more in the additional parts of this presentation, in terms of how alcohol influences health, fat loss, body composition, performance, recovery, sleep, all manner of things. But there is no positive benefit to it. Now, having a glass of wine the one time a month when you go out for food, or maybe even just once a week, the one glass, like, I will not bemoan you for that because some people just like to do it. That's fine. I'm talking to the folks who maybe drink multiple times a week, who say that I'm having a glass. That glass is a bottle. Do you really need to be drinking that much? And I think one of the best things that I one of the best things that you can do, it's one of the things that I swear to God, I have worked with so many people. I have yet to meet one person who I've said this to, who I've challenged it to, who has not seen monumental benefit. That is, I want you to audit your relationship with alcohol, and I want you to try and reduce it, or else try being sober for a period of time. I've never met anyone who has done that and who has not experienced the benefit from it. So that's my take on alcohol. I think as a society, we're doing better at drinking less. I also worry and contend with what it's being replaced with. Certainly since lockdown, I think isolation has been a major issue. I think especially in the younger generations. Now it's sort of like there's a massive discrepancy where you've got very young people and very old people who are very isolated nowadays. Old people have always been isolated for a number of, sort of very understandable reasons. Maybe a spouse has passed or family have passed, or they're not as mobile as they used to be. They might have a health issue, this, that, and the other. Young people, it's not as understandable. Why are they so isolated? What is society doing to them that has made them so isolated? And is that a direct consequence of lockdown, or are there other elements? And what else is happening? Are they replacing alcohol with other drugs, which I think is a potential issue as well, that's maybe not being spoken about. And what else is really going on there? I know that there's all this hubbub about incel culture and things like that. I do worry about that. I do worry about the temptation of those communities who absorb these young people in, these young men. I think there's also fem cells as well. These young women, these young men, they absorb them in. They have this like-minded um, sort of community, but it's really it's a warped community built around poor experiences, and often those poor experiences are because of not developing social skills at an early age and therefore being judged in social settings. And then I also wonder about the influence of devices and how that's impacting people and things like that too. But anyway, so alcohol to me is never a good thing. There is no positive benefit. And with this with this podcast episode, I have included in the description several resources that I think are really going to be helpful for you. So, like I said, we're going to have how alcohol influences health and fat loss, but also within that, how you can actually broach the subject of reducing your alcohol intake, setting realistic goals around that, and actually having those really difficult conversations with friends, family members, and even your partner to help make that a reality, because that is also a very difficult element of reducing your alcohol intake. So, so that's alcohol. I'll probably talk about it in a future episode as well, but that's my experience with alcohol. Those are my lessons, those are my learnings, those are my failures around alcohol, and hopefully you can find uh some familiarity within that, some understanding and some appreciation that you're not alone in the challenges that you face. And for people to use alcohol in that way, it's so common. It's so common. And I just wanted to share that with you because I feel like transparency and honesty and communication are the gateways to actually helping people get the right support, make progress in their lives, and shed themselves of these great big anchors to kind of weigh them down that they drag along secretly behind them. So that's alcohol. The second half of the podcast is going to be a bit shorter, because I really just want to share this really powerful message. And the message itself, like I'd said when I introduced it at the beginning, was or is that the journey is the point. And there is I guess, I don't know if he would describe himself as a philosopher, but he sort of, there's no other better way to describe him. He maybe a teacher, something like that. But there is an individual called Alan Watts. And I really like Alan Watts. I like a lot of the things he talks about. And he had this quote that, like I said at the start, light bulb moment. Things just made sense. And it was so powerful the first time I heard it. I had to re-listen to it again and again and again. And it was in one of these like motivational videos. I don't know about you. I listened to those like all the time. I'm obsessed. So I'm you can imagine what I'm like during the day after having, a massive coffee and having, consumed like five of these motivational things back to back. Um, Alan Alan Watts said this. He said, when you're watching two people dancing, you're not watching them to reach a certain destination on the floor. The whole point is the dance itself. And I was like, that just makes sense. That just makes sense. And how you can sort of extrapolate that, not just to health and fitness, but everything is very simply this. And it's something that my industry, our industry, if you're involved in the health and fitness industry, or if you're seeking out someone to work with within that industry, the one thing that we always forget about is it's who you become that matters the most. Identity change. It's honestly it's one of the key frameworks that underpin how I work, how we work with people. We call it the IBA method, identity belief action. Our industry does a wonderful job of convincing people it's what they do that matters. Now, of course, what you do eventually shapes who you become, but who you become is never spoken about. And so sustainability is never considered. Practicality is never considered. Health is never considered. The best version of yourself is never considered. It's always just what's the new diet that will get me this result faster? Everything is expediency. And expediency, whilst can be a really tempting marketing tool, is not the best thing in practice or in principle for actually helping to cement true change. And true change is a result is a result of who you become. At the start, I had said I could no longer, well, not at the start, but somewhere through the first part of that, the first half of the podcast, I had said I could no longer picture myself in the shoes of the heavier version of Jamie, who was binge eating and doing all these things. And that's because my identity had shifted so much at that stage. And that's what we try to cultivate in the people that we work with, is it's not just what you do that matters, because the what you do is not all that sexy. When you look at the evidence for what works, it's not these super duper extreme diets or these magical pills or these unbelievably complex exercise programs or even the new wave of weight loss drugs. None of those things seem to be effective long term. They all seem to have some sort of impact on the short term. Wonderful, but that short term thinking leads people into the cycle, the diet trap, if you want to call it that. But we have this very same sort of outlook on everything, whether it be careers, relationships, finances. How many times have you got into a relationship with someone who you know is not right for you, but who you are attracted to? It's like, well, especially if you're a man. I mean, if you're a man and someone catches you at the right moment, I mean, you'd be attracted to like, a hole in the floor. That's what men are like. But even women can get into the pitfalls of getting into a relationship with someone they're attracted to, but they know is not right for them. So it's short-term thinking. Or you take out a loan to get a holiday that you know you can't pay back. Short-term thinking. Or you quit your job because you had a bad day. Short-term thinking, right? Because then you're going to be left with no income, no work. It's going to be very difficult to get another job. Once you're in a relationship like that, very difficult to get out of. You may be stuck in it for a while. You might have commitments or entanglements with that person. What happens if you rent a flat? What happens if you get a house? What happens if you get a pet, have a family? Oh my God, have a child, disaster. What happens if you take that loan and the interest alone is crippling you? Look at the I think the best example of that would probably be the American education system. The student loans they have. Unbelievable interest rates on those. I saw a story not that long ago where a girl had paid off tens of thousands of dollars, and when she checked her account, the loan was greater after having paid that money off than when she started because she'll never catch up on the loan. Short-term thinking, right? And so whenever we work with people and whenever I try and think about things, it's who am I becoming? Who am I becoming that matters? And you can envision it in so many different ways. Like I could say to you today, you know, Joe Blogs, I'll give you your dream body today. You need to figure out how to maintain it. Could you do it? No, of course you couldn't, because you've never understood what it took to get it. You've not become that person. And it would be the same thing if I give you your dream, say like your dream car, or your dream business, or your dream house, or your dream partner, whatever. And you'd be in a position which is probably worse than never having had it at all. You would have to steward and watch over the decline of that thing over time. You would have to be subject to the entropy of that thing because you've never become the person who would need to have it, to have built it, to have developed it, whether it be a relationship or a business or a house or whatever. And that to me would be so much more painful than to have never had it at all. And so when we're talking about the journey, and this is what I describe to people, because I think we have this like inbuilt sprint-like mentality when it comes to, well, definitely health change, and a lot of that is as a product of the dieting industry. But we have this sprint-like mentality for everything. I'll just overreach, and hopefully I reach that point and I'll cling to my fingertips and hope that I can hold on. And do you know what it reminds me of? A lot with dieting, it definitely reminds me of dieting. Sports days. We used to have these like big lanes, right? These big lanes that were like, it looked like a bouncy castle, right? Like a bouncy castle, with the big sort of like inflatable sides and the bottom. And you would see, you would see adults, right? Adults would have like this weird harness on. Then you'd realize it would be like a bungee harness. So they would try and sprint as far as they could, and you'd see all manner of people trying to do this. And some would get a little bit, some would get quite far, but it was the same result every time. They would be clinging to the sides, clinging to the floor, and all of a sudden they get, pulling back to the start. And the difficulty, the difficulty with this is that there's no wall to catch you, right? You don't just regress back to where you started. You tend to be shot straight out the back. You regress even further because not only are you now, at least in the sort of if the conversation is around health and dieting, you're in a much worse place physically and mentally. Mentally, you've probably lost some self-confidence, you've lost some self-esteem, you have a lot more questions, you have a lot more self-doubt, a lot more confusion. You might have disordered eating, you might have a warped relationship with your body, you might have a whole host of issues physically, because a lot of these diets are very extreme these days, and we do see this an awful lot now, especially with the weight loss medications. A lot of lean muscle mass lost, a lot of fat mass lost, but that all gets regained back, and that's even easier to regain back whenever you've lost an awful lot of lean muscle mass and your energy expenditure has declined and been severely impacted. But you can also see issues along with potentially, increasing the risk of injury. You might even see declines in bone mass density, which you can never fully restore once that's lost. And there's so many consequences that we don't care about because we only care about the short-term thinking. And what I'm asking you to think about is not short-term anymore, but embrace the journey. Forget the sprint, the journey. That's what I want you to focus on. And it's not a journey towards just a specific point on the scale or a specific financial income or a specific relationship or a specific home. I want you to think about it like this. There's the best version of me that I'll never quite reach. There's the healthiest, happiest version of me that I'll never quite reach. But every single day, I can take a step forward. And that step forward means I'm becoming healthier, I'm becoming happier, and I'm becoming a better version of me. And I'm becoming a better version of me for myself, for my family, for my friends, for my partner, for my children, for my community, for all the people who I influence or rely on me. I'm becoming a better version for them. But that is only going to happen if you embrace the journey. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense. I really love the concept, of the journey, and I sort of take that approach with everything in life now. And again, that allows me to be a lot more present in the day. How can I be better today? How can I win today? Win the day. And how can I just take one step forward today? Because if I did that for 30 days, where would I be? If I did that for a year, where would I be? If I did it for 10 years, I would not recognize my life. And I don't recognize my life because I committed to that, not even intentionally, but I committed to that a long time ago. That socially inept, sitting in his room, lonely, eating all the time, binging, you know, just afraid, hurt, just lost boy. His granddad took a chance on him and didn't let him give up. And that was the start of my journey. And this is where I'm at today. And I cannot wait to see where I'm at a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. So I would ask you to take the same mentality. And it's never too late to get started. I know we live in a world where everyone has everything. You go on social media and all of a sudden you feel guilty for not having a mansion and 6 cars and blah, blah, blah. But all that matters is you live the best version of your life because they might be miserable. You don't know, you know. All you can do is live the best version of your life. And so that's what I would task you with. Try and embrace the journey. And the challenge for today, because we always like to have a wee challenge on these episodes. So the challenge for this is nothing massively complex, um, but it is thematic for the first half of the podcast. Podcast for the first half of the podcast. I just want you to try having no alcohol for the next week. Audit that relationship with alcohol. Where could I make improvements with it? And this is what I want you to record at the start of the week and at the end of the week. So if you've just had a night of drinking, whatever, I want you to record and reflect on how you feel generally about yourself and your mood, how your sleep is, how you are feeling about your performance and recovery, and how you're feeling maybe about your nutrition and how controlled you are around your food intake. And then at the end of the week, what I want you to do is go back and I want to ask yourself, how do I feel now about myself and my mood? How do I feel now about how my sleep has changed and improved? How do I feel now about the differences in my performance and recovery and how they've changed and improved? And how do I feel now about my nutrition and the control around food and how that has improved? That's all I want you to do. I just wanted you to embrace sobriety for 7 days. 7 days. Easy. Easy. And you'll find that once you get to the end of that 7 days, that'll probably become 14. And then it might become 30. And then that might become 60, 90, 180, 365. And it will just keep, I've lost count now. I was going to do 2 years, but I couldn't quite figure that out in my head quick enough. So I was going to say something wrong. So I thought I'd just move on. But you get the gist, and I'll leave you with that challenge. And I'd just like to finish off this episode of the Journey podcast, episode 3. We're really motoring, guys. In the future episodes, we are going to have one of our first guests on, which will be lovely. And I just like to finish every episode just by saying that I hope that there was value in this for you. I am so grateful that you're listening. And if there's anything that I can help you with or we can help you with, please just send us a message. Or if you have anything that you want me to discuss or go over in these episodes, just send me a message. But thank you for tuning in for episode 3. Very grateful. And hopefully we can continue on the journey together.